this is going to sound so cheesy, but it's so true. Working for a company that has such a strong mission, I'm able to kind of get people healthier. And not just that, but there's a real sense of community around what Spartan does. And, people find both fitness and support through other people because of their, ability to do these races.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm Megan Henry, and I'm joined today by my partner, Scott Ribney. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing outstanding. How are you, Megan?
Very good. And I'm very excited about our podcast today. I think you join my enthusiasm. Today we have on Deanna Sheridan, who is the General Counsel and Vice President at Spartan Race. And she's here to talk about all the hats that she has to wear as General Counsel and the interesting things that she has to deal with on a day-by-day with Spartan Race. And I know Scott's excited to talk to her too. He's participated in a bunch of them and has a little more inside track than I do.
Oh, you have no idea how excited I am for this one and to be able to talk to Deanna here. I've done a bunch of these races. They're probably one of my favorite races out there. I've dragged my kids out, gotten all three of them involved, including my 5-year-old recently when they had the virtual Spartan race this past spring when everything shut down. So I've got a lot of questions I want to ask her. Hopefully I don't pry too much into things that I shouldn't stick my nose in here. But if it gets me a couple of free race passes at the end of the day, then I'll be thrilled. And I know I'll have even happier kids. It'll be like Christmas early.
Well, fingers crossed for you. So as always, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe below and have a listen onto this episode. Deanna, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on The Defense Never Rests.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you have, in my eyes, a super interesting job, and I think for Scott as well. You are the General Counsel and Vice President of Spartan Races, which I think is super interesting. But for some of our listeners who may not have any idea what Spartan Race is, can you just enlighten them a little bit?
It is hard to summarize in a snippet, but I will do my best. So Spartan was founded about 10 years ago by our CEO, Joe DeSena. It started off on his farm in Vermont as an obstacle course race. The difference between Spartan and some of the other obstacle course events that are out there is that it's a timed event. And so, the intention is really to make sure that people are really pushing themselves past the limits that they put in front of themselves mentally, and for people to go out and have a good time. And people can either sign up individually or go with a corporate team or a group of friends. And we have everything from a 5K course, which we call our Spartan Sprint, to pretty intense endurance events. They go all the way up to what we call our Ultra, which is a double beast and is more than 20 miles and 100 obstacles. And then we also have really expanded in the last couple of years to embrace all kinds of endurance and fitness events and products. And so it's much more than just obstacle course events. We have Spartan trail races. And we have, as of 2020, we have a new event called the DecaFit, which is the decathlon of functional fitness. So it really embraces a whole lifestyle and isn't just the events, but it is definitely always interesting and never boring. So you're right. It's a fun job to have.
Yeah, and I'll be upfront. I have not done a Spartan race, but Scott has done a few and has his family as well. So I'll just put that out there right now. I haven't done one yet, but
that's okay. We'll get you to one when the races are back on again.
They are addicting. I will tell you that. I've got a 10-year-old son who loves doing them beyond belief. My youngest is 5. She can't wait to get out there and start doing those come next year when they start up again.
That's awesome. Yeah, I forgot to mention that we have kids races. So I'm glad that your kids are so into it. My son is 5 as well, and they started at age 4 for the Spartan Kids events. And so he did his first race last year and was also pretty disappointed that he couldn't do an event this year. So we're all looking forward to being able to get both the grown-ups and the kids out on the courses again next year.
Yeah, my daughter was planning, she wanted to do one because her teacher did one last year. And she's like, can I be a Spartan kid? And she was going to do one in September at Citizens Bank Park in Philly. But I think that's one of that and the Kids Bop concert getting canceled were the two things I think she was most upset about.
Those are both pretty devastating.
Well, Megan,
I don't know which one of those you were disappointed by, but.
Well, Megan, hey, can I embarrass my two and just show you what they'll look like if your kids will look like if they get into that real quick? You mind taking me? Give me 1 second here, because these are always kind of fun things to do here. That was my oldest.
Oh, that's a good one. That's great.
Yep. But then from there they get into if they like mud, that's the race for them.
It's a good place to be if you like mud.
Yep. And then even the oldest one loved getting into it at that point. So
that's great.
So, but how did you find yourself in this role? How did you get here?
It was not a linear path, for sure. So I started off in private practice. I was a construction litigator at the beginning of my career. And then eventually moved over into corporate. So we'll kind of speed ahead to my in-house years. In 2010, I went in-house to my previous employer and was there for about 5 years. I was at a company called Noresco, which does energy savings construction projects. And so was still very sort of like firmly in the construction world. And I had stayed in touch with a good colleague of mine that we had been at Ropes and Gray together, and he had gone to Spartan Race and eventually become the general counsel. And so when I was looking for an opportunity back in 2016, he and I connected, and he just happened to have an open opportunity for an assistant general counsel role. And I'm a marathoner. I'm a runner. I've done lots of Ragnar relays, if it's okay for me to mention a competitor. And it's a different kind of race because it's a group of 10 to 12 people that are in sort of like smelly vans, and you're running 200 miles in the course of like 36 hours. And so I was used to these really interesting, extreme endurance events. And I thought they were really fascinating. And so when the opportunity at Spartan came up, it was like, oh my gosh, this is the dream opportunity of blending sort of the passion, project, the hobby, and, what I do for a living. And so I joined as assistant general counsel in 2016, and then he moved on in 2017, and then I started managing the legal department, and then was appointed the GC role in 2018. So I've been here ever since.
At the risk of drawing the ire of people in my firm, I think you have my dream job. I will just say that, honestly. Careful
what you wish for. We'll probably get into that in a minute.
Well, and going off of that, I mean, because you went from, being in a law firm to going in-house, mm-hmm. and, how does the daily life change? Is it really cushy, or is it, nowhere near that?
No, I mean, we definitely sort of live by the, the brand imagery that we have for anybody who's familiar with our brand. So I think in-house is great. I mean, first of all, I should make the requisite statement that I love not having the billable hour anymore. So that's definitely been a great aspect of being in-house for the last 9 years. I don't think it's cushier. It's just a different type of stress. And I love sort of having that soup to nuts approach of really being involved with the business units and being a business partner and being very proactive in terms of providing guidance, whether it's to a junior employee or to the board or to a member of the C-suite. And so I knew the moment that I went in-house that I wanted to stay in-house for, my next role. And so Spartan was certainly a perfect fit for that reason. And coming to a company that's 10 years old at this point and is still, late stage startup mode. We operate very lean. And you still have quite a few folks that were there for, the founding of the business. It's a very different role in terms of sort of like rolling up your sleeves and being able to troubleshoot and develop some of the business than it is when you're in private practice and, sometimes you're really just getting a discrete project and then you may never hear about it again after you've, delivered your services. So I don't know if I can categorize a particular day. It's definitely a whirlwind. I think that any in-house lawyer would categorize their job as sort of like shifting priorities and things pop up all the time. And the variety definitely makes it interesting. And at Spartan, I think everything's just sped up 100x. I mean, we really have, we have a global business. We operate in 43 countries. And before COVID, we had over 250 events a year. And so for a small legal team to keep up with that, it's a lot. And you have to be very flexible and willing to not really have an ego, attached to really solving some of the business issues.
Now, can I just ask you this one question, because one of many anyway, Spartan's like nothing else out there on the planet. Coming from an outside legal role to a company like that, I mean, I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of different companies in your former life. What kind of challenges are unique to you and kind of the obstacle course racing that you say, geez, I never would have thought of that doing, whether it's construction defect litigation, product liability litigation, fill in the name of the blank litigation that 90% of the lawyers on the planet deal with here?
That's a great question. One of the reasons that I think that I've been, it's been such a natural fit for me is that I didn't have a linear path prior to going in-house. And so having both the construction litigation and the business background, as well as, dabbling in some other practice areas along the way. I had some contract gigs in other practice areas, and I was a paralegal before I went to law school, really allowed me to be prepared for, just the bizarre requests that you'd never thought would come up at, in an in-house role. And so I think all of that laid the foundation for me to be at Spartan. And it's really just being prepared for not knowing the answer and getting really comfortable with just, okay, what is this? Let's figure this out and troubleshoot it in a moment's notice. And so, at a place like Spartan, yes, and it's an events business. And so we have the typical scenarios where, yes, from time to time we have to manage bodily injury cases. And I'm certainly on the phone with my insurance broker on a regular basis to make sure that we are meeting our coverage needs and we're being strategic about that. But it's, we have an e-commerce business, and especially now when everybody's working remotely, there's a huge focus on e-commerce and making sure that we're developing that. And then we also have a really sophisticated marketing arm that has really shifted into an in-house agency mode. And so we have internal content that we're generating on a regular basis. And then we have nutritional products, training products, and it's just, we're really trying to expand in all directions at once. And so it's exciting to really sort of stretch and make sure that I'm asking the questions that need to be addressed when, we're dealing with product liability issues or, construction defect issues, or employment issues and, other standard kind of, compliance matters that all in-house attorneys need to manage.
How about the nature of the competitors? I mean, one of the great things about the Spartan races, and as we were talking before, I've done a few to say the least, and is the breadth of the participants there. I mean, you have people from all walks of life, from the elite athletes to the ones who probably just rolled off of their couch and are trying to relive their high school sports days. How much of a concern is it for the company? And I don't think this gets a lot of attention for like the overall health of the athletes coming in there, especially kind of those that fall into the latter group here. And, some of these really, what I find fun obstacles.
I don't know if you and I have the same definition of fun, so that's interesting. I do like attending events. It's the feeling is electric in terms of like showing up on race day and everyone's so excited to be there. It's definitely a unique type of like mass participation event to attend and participate in. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another aspect of what makes Spartan unique, is that, we have a pro team. And so in a lot of ways, I have the same challenges that a lot of other professional sports team would have in terms of making sure that we're managing our pro athletes effectively. But then we also, are really trying to appeal to folks that are in couch to 5K mode. So I think that number one, for better or for worse, our marketing tends to prepare people for this is going to be really intense. And so we almost have the opposite challenge, where there are people that are very capable of doing a Spartan event, whether they're marathoners or, active CrossFit athletes or triathletes, that look at a Spartan event and go, oh no, I could never do that. That looks way too intimidating. And they actually could do that, but we've been really adjusting our marketing over the years in order to make sure that people know that, we are welcoming everyone to our events, and we want to make sure that you've trained, appropriately in order for that first event. So don't go sign up for the 13-mile race if you've never done one before. And, that's why we've really gamified sort of the event options that are out there for people to do. So now we have a training app, and, we've got all kinds of fitness programs, and we've got, if you don't want to try your hand at obstacles yet, do a Spartan Trail event. And so we're trying to really kind of have this a la carte offering of all different kinds of events to our customers, so that number one, it makes it fun, and it's really reaching out to engage people as much as possible. But then, of course, from my perspective, it also really helps mitigate that risk in terms of people maybe stretching a little bit too far and taking on something that they're not ready for.
Right. And as a litigator, I'm always thinking about my clients' potential risk. And, and when I think about Spartan and the obstacles that you have that Scott has so much fun with, that, in my mind, I'm like, they create with each obstacle, even how an inexperienced or experienced competitor, it does pose a risk. So, I mean, how do you prepare for that as when you're putting on, releasing an event, or even with new obstacles that you haven't used before, what risk that new obstacle might provide that you don't even know exists yet?
So that's one of the things I love most about my job, is that it's truly a collaborative effort with the other business units in terms of really making sure that the risk mitigation and the safety is baked into all of our decision making. And so I benefit from coming to the company sort of, relatively late compared to some of my colleagues. And my colleague, the VP of production, Mike Morris, has been there forever. And they have this down to a science in terms of the actual obstacle build and operation and tear down of the course. And it was a steep learning curve for me when I first came to Spartan, even though I had a construction background, because it's a temporary structure, that, is really intended to, sort of stand there for 3 weeks, be able to withstand all kinds of conditions and terrain. I mean, you've got, we have 5 obstacle sets that we have on, big trucks that are moving all around the country within the US. And we have about 70 races a year in the United States. And so it's really like the circus coming to town. And so there's, this really sort of you almost have to sit and be walked through, every aspect of where is that obstacle going? What aspect of the build have I not thought about in terms of, every way that a customer could interact with an obstacle or another person at our events. And so it's challenging, but I came into the organization with such a great set of, sort of checklists and structure and conversations around safety in terms of okay, well, we've already got these processes, how do we codify them? And that tends to be the conversation much more than sort of starting from scratch, how do we do this? The one thing that was definitely brand new for us to contemplate was COVID, because we actually had one event in Jacksonville back in June, and it was the sort of one and only event that we hosted in terms of obstacle course races after COVID really hit in the United States. And all of the teams just did this incredible amount of research and planning and risk mitigation in order to be able to say, okay, how can we minimize the risks as much as possible for people who are willing to come out to an event, in this era, and be able to do it safely, but still really have fun and have it be in a way that doesn't kind of take away from what a Spartan feel, would normally be at an event. And in my mind, it was very successful. I can't say that I slept very well that weekend. And then after that, just force majeure conditions being what they were across the rest of the US for our race schedule, we ended up having to cancel the rest of our 2020 race season. But the planning for that event really demonstrated that the team was able to put themselves back into that planning role of saying, okay, from the point of somebody getting out of their car in the parking lot and then walking up to registration, navigating the festival area, and then getting out on the course, how do you mitigate the risk at every single stage of, them being there on race day?
Can I back up a moment and
Sure.
kind of follow up on something you had said before when you were talking about the safety and the procedures and everything? And I know a number of years ago, there was talk about developing I think they called it a board of standards. And now I've been reading a little more about the USA OCR trying to come up with something for the off-road racing courses here. And, given my focus, I know a lot of the plaintiffs' counsel love manuals. They love anything they can use like a report card view checklist to say, okay, here's what you did right, here's what you did wrong. And I don't know if you can answer this or not, but is there a sense or a concern, and I'll just make it general, the off-road obstacle course community, that if you get too detailed into those types of things, that they may be opening themselves up to liability where probably in every other year you wouldn't have seen that?
Are you saying specific to COVID or just in general with regards to the safety standards for the industry?
Yeah, just general safety, whether it's the obstacle courses, how they're set up, laid out, not everything non-COVID, let's put it that way.
Of course, yeah. So I am delighted to talk about that because that is actually one of the things that I really like about my job too. So I am on the ASTM committee to develop the safety standard for the obstacle course race industry. And it's been around for quite a few years. It existed before I arrived and became one of the representatives of Spartan. And like all of the other ASTM committees to develop a safety standard, it's voluntary and it's made up of all sorts of practitioners within a particular industry in order to develop the standard. The obstacle course race industry, the OCR industry, as we like to call it, is tiny. It was very trendy back in 2010, 2012 for lots of these mom and pop operators to just kind of have a 5K mud run, and they were popping up all over the country. But it's a very expensive, business to operate. And as we're discussing, there's a lot to think about in terms of the planning. There's a ton of overhead. There's a lot of risk mitigation. It's not an event planning scenario like a wedding. It's an event planning scenario like, how do you keep 12,000 people safe that are, going through temporarily in one weekend? And so the good thing about the committee is that it's not just lawyers, it's not just engineers, it's not just medical professionals, but everybody who's involved in the OCR industry. We meet regularly in order to develop the standard. It's been through numerous iterations throughout the years. It's been put to a vote. And so we get lots of good feedback, not only from our colleagues on the committee, but within the sort of like events and amusements industries within ASTM. And so we have people that are true experts in ropes courses, the bigwigs at like Disney and MGM that like know exactly what it means to navigate sort of like water features or roller coasters might opine and weigh in on some of what we're doing. And the thing that's unique about what we do is that they're temporary structures. And so it's a very different safety standard than a gym that might build an obstacle course race that's stable and it's just there year round. And so there's a lot that we have to keep in mind where, I can give Spartan's perspective on how we operate something, but we're the biggest player in the industry. And so there may be a much smaller race company that can't afford, the extensive medical services that we provide at our events. And we need to create a minimum that works for everybody, but that clearly is enough to ensure protection for all of the people that are there at the races. So it's definitely a tug of war in some of our meetings. And especially between sort of like the medical professionals and the lawyers, sometimes you get a little bit of back and forth with regards to, are you looking for optimal safety? And the lawyers are like, no, this has to stand up. If somebody's being deposed against, are you compliant against the standards? And so it's a great process. It's slow moving, but it's because it's organic, I think it's going to serve the industry really well.
And I think that's one of the things, like, as I look at that, and I deal a lot with the ASTM standards, but in different contexts here. And I think to the Spartan races, kind of the roughneck nature of them being out in the woods, these obstacles just seemingly put out of nowhere. I think to myself, boy, if you start to have more standards in place, is someone going to turn around then and say, well, you really shouldn't have this particular obstacle in there because it might not be safe. If you're crawling under barbed wire, what if someone says, oh, I got hit, I need a tetanus shot? Or, carrying the, bags of sand down a hill, someone would say, well, it doesn't quite fit in with a certain safety thing. Mm-hmm. Is there a concern that as you get more and more of the standards that the race may lose some of the obstacles that the people who've been with it for a while really like, or is it just something?
No, I don't. I think that the industry folks are really aligned on making sure that we're making it effective in order to keep out any truly negligent operators, but allow those of us that have been operating for quite a long time and know what we're doing to continue to develop our obstacles and the features on our courses. And a great example is Tough Mudder, which started off as our biggest competitor back in, around the same time that we started, 2010 to 2012 era. And we just acquired them this year. They have electricity obstacles, and that's never been something that's a feature of Spartan obstacles. And so we have to be, very sort of balanced in terms of, are we drawing a line when we're creating this standard that is going to specifically address that, or are we going to stay away from it? We certainly don't want to bar it because it's something that Tough Mudder is really known for. And I don't think there's any desire, at least that hasn't been communicated to me yet, to get rid of those obstacles yet. So it's definitely, the thing that goes along with that is, as another sort of example, Tough Mudder has much bigger obstacles. They use a lot of fall protection. Spartan Race has obstacles that we are trying very hard, and we do a lot of engineering analysis on, can you use water as fall pro? Can you use sand? Can you use grass? As opposed to creating something that's so tall that it then necessitates the additional fall protection. So we try to stay away from over-engineering the standard so that it doesn't sort of immediately disqualify any particular obstacles that have been proven to be safe because of all of the risk mitigation features that a particular company might have in place for it.
And to me, it's just fascinating because I think to the maybe average person who hasn't participated in either of these races, you kind of think of Tough Mudder and Spartan very similar, but when you talk about how different they are, you're like, yeah, they are
they're very really different. Yeah, and one of the things that was startling for me was doing the diligence at, in the acquisition stage, and realizing that our customer base has very little overlap. We're both in the OCR community, but they have a very different brand. They appeal to a different market. They've traditionally been much bigger among the sort of corporate teams than Spartan has. And so it's actually sort of a beautiful pairing to add the Tough Mudder brand to all of the other Spartan branded events that we do, because it appeals to a completely different group of people. And so you may want to go get muddy, but not be timed. And, you know, the whole vibe at a Tough Mudder event is to like high five and hang out. And it's like this really like feel good atmosphere. And it's like, there's an amazing sort of tribal feel community vibe at a Spartan event. And people are really supportive, but there's that Spartan edge to it as well, where everybody's trying to compete with their own time.
I'd like to take a moment, just kind of switch gears, Deanna, if we can. And I think the comparison you made between the Tough Mudder and the Spartan, it's a great analogy. And you know, as I said, when we were talking before we started, I do insurance, and insurance is all about risk. And obviously jumping through fire, climbing 15-foot walls, or, you know, going through an electrified field is a far cry from, you know, the local town running a 5K here.
Mm-hmm.
I know in the beginning, the premiums that the OCR races, from what I've read, were paying on insurance were astronomical, you know, 5 to 10 times that of a traditional foot race, even a marathon. Are you seeing now, especially with the acquisition of Tough Mudder, the insurance kind of stabilizing a little more now that they've got a 10 years worth of, say, actuarials to go by?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely one positive impact that's resulted in that. And it's not just the data in terms of, you know, loss runs and, you know, anecdotal evidence of particular claims, but it's also demonstrating to the carriers that we know what we're doing, and we have the track record for that as well in terms of the internal focus on risk mitigation. And so we have a very collaborative approach through our broker with our carriers in terms of, you know, really making sure that they have a thorough understanding of all of the risk mitigation efforts that we put into place. And, you know, that means not just our waiver and not just the signage that goes on site, but, you know, our obstacle analysis in terms of the actual assessment of what's the level of risk before we put the risk mitigation procedures in place, what's the level of risk after, what's the severity, what's the likelihood, what's the frequency, and then taking a look at all of our checklists on a regular basis, as well as personnel procedures. And it really encompasses everything, because, you know, there's sort of personnel training that needs to go in to place in terms of just the communications between our employees and the public, in addition to sort of like addressing all of the actual structures at the event. So we really have seen stabilization on our premiums, and, you know, have developed a very good relationship with our insurance carriers over the years. And, you know, it's gratifying to me that Spartan is sort of best in class when it comes to endurance events, when, you know, don't really see the sort of like pushback or like, you know, sort of intense inquiry into something that I might have expected 4 years ago if I had asked, you know, for coverage on a particular race or a particular project.
Now, have you seen it all? And I guess if I was going to equate it to something outside of, you know, the obstacle course races, something like a triathlon,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where it's more of a mixed event. Have you found that the insurance is getting comparable, or is comparable to what you would have for something like that? Because I know, and I'll just, you know, use my wife, I'll throw her out there as an example here. She looks at, you know, me taking my kids out to the Spartan races, doing that, and her first thought is everything bad that you could possibly imagine. And she's a little more comfortable when I would jump in the Hudson to go swimming for a triathlon race, but not by much. Are you seeing there, like on the numbers standpoint, whether it's the actuarials or the insurance premiums, again, not looking for numbers,
Sure.
but are they kind of along the same lines now?
So the premiums I can't really speak to, number one, because I'm not familiar with what the premiums might look like for other sports. I mean, really, when you're looking at triathlons, Ironman's the one, major player in the game. And they have such a different profile because of the frequency of their events, the types of events, sort of looking at global coverage versus US coverage alone, that it's a little bit apples and oranges. And then, remember, we're just a fitness lifestyle brand at this point too. And so my portfolio is just this huge, insane patchwork of coverage, because it's not just the CGL and excess tower that I have to worry about on a regular basis. It's making sure that we've got the media and the cyber and foreign package coverage in order to address, anytime that we've got our employees going to one of our partners events, in another country, that means we have to make sure that, we've got that extra level of protection, even if we're not operating that event. So it's a little hard to compare just looking at the premiums, but we have looked at injury rates in other sports. And I work very closely with our head of global brand on PR matters. And of course, crisis communications is part and parcel of both of our jobs. And the injury rates for OCR in general, not Spartan specifically, are way lower than most people would anticipate, and even lower than marathons. And so, of course, if you're comparing it to something like gymnastics, it's going to have a much lower injury rate, just given what the nature of the sport is. But if you're looking for other mass participation events, it's actually, a much lower injury rate and a much lower catastrophic injury rate, especially. And so that is huge, both for the carriers and for, us internal folks that are trying to mitigate the risk, as well as make sure that we're, managing the communications on that.
I just have one other question about insurance. I'm going to shut up and get away from my wheelhouse for a moment. Is there one or two particular things with regard to insurance? It's a very open-ended insurance that you would say keep you up at night or have you worry the most as you look at the races or the company to make sure, okay, you've got the right coverage, you don't. And, I throw out this case I was reading about, this 2007 decision in Florida involving a dirty foot type of obstacle race. And you're smart. I think that you've probably heard of the case where they had someone got injured, they had insurance, but the insurance excluded sporting events from it. So they were on their own for that, which I'm sure was a rude awakening, and you're far and above that type of thing. But I guess the concept still remains, what's like the biggest thing that keeps you up at night?
Luckily, it's not the safety and risk mitigation issues for our events. It's usually sort of like the mix of and the breadth of everything else that we're managing, just because the organization as a whole has gotten so fine-tuned when it comes to making sure that, number one, that we're covered, and number two, that we're doing all we can in order to maintain that good relationship with our carrier. In the early days of, me being at Spartan, I sweated a lot just because I wasn't, I was coming to everything with a very different industry perspective. And so I definitely had to kind of constantly assess my personal relationship with, how much risk I was willing to manage. And I have to say, it's probably not an industry for everybody. There's probably a lot of folks that would just kind of go, yeah, I'm not getting anywhere near this stuff. But it's a privately held company. It's not public. And, so I have a fiduciary duty to a founder and, a few shareholders that are very comfortable with how we've gotten to where we are, or at least where we are now. And so our carrier has been very receptive to, hey, we have this new idea, like, let's, sort of like vet this new obstacle event type, whatever it is. And, we go back and forth and they ask questions and we fine tune the details. And my broker plays a really large role in that relationship. And they've been an amazing partner in terms of really making sure that they're sort of helping us really flesh out our risk mitigation program for whatever it is that we're discussing. And then I've hired risk management consultants in the past in order to make sure that they're reading the fine print in the policies, so that we don't end up, with a major exclusion like that, leaves us holding the bag. So I'm luckily, I've gotten to the point where, there's not a lot about sort of our regular cadence that keeps me up at night. It's just making sure that I'm really on my toes when it comes to the new product or the new event type, so that I'm really making sure that we're going through the checklist and not forgetting anything.
Do you get to try them out first?
I choose not to. I'm going to rely on the engineering data. I don't get out to many events. That was definitely devastating for me. And like as on a personal note, in the midst of COVID, that this was going to be my year in order to get out to more Spartan events and actually participate. And I wasn't able to do that this year, but next year I will be doing test runs on the obstacles.
One thing you had mentioned a little bit about, you mentioned waivers, and obviously I presume that everyone has to sign a waiver before participating. Yeah. But how have you found the effectiveness of those waivers holding up across? I mean, every state's a little different how they handle them.
It depends.
But
is there a podcast bingo where you get to see which of your guests say it depends and answer to a good question like that?
Well, I say it depends all the time.
Yeah, it really depends on the state, and it depends on the circumstances of, the claim arising. And so it has been very effective in certain jurisdictions, and we've been really relieved that, the language has really sort of, been tested and held up in certain jurisdictions. And, just like any, document, contract, waiver, it certainly needs to be updated on a regular basis as, the laws are changing and evolving in each state. I have a 50-state analysis as frequently as I can, or at least a 35-state analysis, however many states that we operate in. And so we really try to make sure that we're vetting it both for enforceability in particular states, as well as enforceability on the parents assuming the liability on behalf of a minor, which is a whole new ballgame. Right. So you've got this sort of like multi-layered analysis that goes into the language. So, and, we've expanded. So we, up until last year, operated in the United States and the UK directly, and then beyond those two countries, we operate on a licensee model in all of the other countries where we have races. And so we have trusted partners that are operated, licensed to operate those events for us. And we took over in Canada this year. And so, coming up to speed in Canada with 9 more jurisdictions or 6 more jurisdictions where those races were going to be, it was, another sort of like new learning curve. But I love the aspect of it forces you to get better all the time. And so, sort of lessons learned in one jurisdiction, you can sort of go, oh, wait a minute, we should probably apply this to, the template over in the United States. So it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. And adding the international aspect is just a whole nother can of worms that, you don't have much experience with, or likely don't have much experience with before, getting there. But do you think that, people are very loyal to the brand and to the races. And do you think there's that loyalty also kind of motivates people a little bit more to honor the waiver and be like, well, I decided to participate in this race. I assumed the risk that I could possibly get injured. And I love this company.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It, beyond the legal analysis, it actually really does make a difference. And the legal team often gets notices we have an insurance, a blanket accident policy in place to protect customers. And so up to $100,000 in, losses can be submitted to this, regardless of what your deductible is on your, healthcare insurance. And so, we'll get people that come to the legal department with questions before they actually submit their claim to the carrier. And, sometimes they're apologetic, which you're kind of like, no, it's okay. You don't have to apologize for asking this. But there's so many of them that are so good natured and kind of, end their emails with like, see you out on the course as soon as I'm healed. And, that's one aspect of, working for a B2C company that's incredibly gratifying because, typically legal doesn't always get the best case, scenario when we're dealing with a situation. A lot of times it's, the worst case, and when something's really escalated to the point where we need to help troubleshoot. And it's so nice to have sort of those positive interactions with the customers, even though we're not the ones that get to really engage with them on a regular basis.
What would you say is probably the most rewarding or gratifying aspect of your job?
I think this is going to sound so cheesy, but it's so true. Honestly, it's working for a company that has such a strong mission and is making a difference. And, that's certainly been true for past firms and companies that I've worked for. But before I came to Spartan, I was always in a B2B company, and it's a little less tangible in terms of seeing that personal impact that you have on the world, just by delivering legal services. And at Spartan, honestly, just the times that I'm hearing of a transformation story from a customer, whether it's a little boy on crutches who navigated the kids race by himself without the use of the crutches because he really wanted to kind of force himself through and achieve it, or somebody who lost 100 pounds because they really wanted to get to the point where they felt like they could be competitive at a Spartan race, or somebody who found obstacle course racing as an effective way to deal with their PTSD. There's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those stories, and our marketing team does a really good job of making sure that they're really storytelling when it comes to that social media engagement and the PR engagement. And that is such a nice sort of like grounding moment in any day where I get to experience that and have it not just be about the contracts and the waivers and, the insurance policies, but really realize that I'm able to kind of get people healthier. And not just that, but there's a real sense of community around what Spartan does. And, people find both fitness and support through other people because of their, ability to do these races. And it's nice to have that moment so frequently throughout the week.
And I got to tell you, my kids got hooked on the 2 seasons you had of the Spartan races on TV. And you want to talk about uplifting stories. Megan, it's a great download to watch some of the people and the stories and things that they did to overcome. And then they work towards overcoming, all these obstacles and working together. It's really a great message that I don't think a lot of people pay enough attention to. And when they do, it's kind of like, wow, that says something.
Yeah, a lot of our elite, I like the, I miss the sports show in terms of the coverage of the races. I really liked the sort of the personal side of showing a lot of these athletes, whether they were everyday athletes or elite athletes that were participating, and really showing what it took for them to get there on race day. And I'm really in awe of our elite racers. It's, another type of uplifting and sort of, inspiration to see them versus, sort of like the community stories, because some of them really dedicate their whole life around obstacle course racing. And so they structure the rest of their career and, and social life around it. And it's so inspiring. It's really amazing to be a part of something that's got so many different facets.
What's the most inspiring story you've heard?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I might have to get back to you on that one. There's so many to choose from. It's hard for me to pick one. There was one woman who approached Joe. Joe DeSena, our CEO, is the face of the brand. I mean, the brand really embodies his personality, and the customers have pretty easy access to him. I mean, he goes to a lot of the events, and people are always approaching him and telling him their personal stories. And there was a woman who approached him, I believe last year at our World Championship event in Lake Tahoe, and wanted him to know what it took for her to get there. And she had lost a loved one to suicide and had been in a really dark place herself for over a year. And she kind of just poured her heart and soul into Spartan, and going to races really helped her sort of fight through that. And so she really kind of got through the tunnel, and it meant so much to her to be at the World Championship and to actually see him, you know, in the first couple of days of being there, that, you know, even though I didn't get to experience it personally, it's such a stark reminder that, you know, we have this very real impact on people's lives that's, you know, so beneficial in ways that, you know, we don't even think about when we're just kind of planning the events and you know, operating them.
I can say a few years ago, I had the pleasure of visiting your offices, and I've never felt like more lazy in my life.
It's intense.
I am a pretty fit person, but I'm like, I cannot take the elevator. Everyone was sitting on no one sat in a real chair.
Lots of fitness balls. Yeah.
So it's got to be motivating on a daily basis that you're like, I got to keep up because all these people are keeping up.
That's actually one of the reasons that I was so interested in joining the company when I first interviewed, because it was positive peer pressure. And so, you know, it wasn't sort of, you know, defending the fact that I was eating salad at lunch when I could be eating something, you know, much more indulgent. It was sort of like, oh, I'm the only one not eating salad for lunch. I better step up my game. And so, you know, it's definitely intense. I'm not saying that people can't have a cookie once in a while at Spartan, and not everybody is fully committed to the Spartan lifestyle. But I like that aspect of being there. It's, you know, it really sort of makes you push yourself, you know, push yourself beyond what you think you're capable of, because, you know, even as a lawyer and pulling lots of late nights earlier in my career, and midway into my career, you know, I thought I knew what it meant to really sort of like push myself and have that kind of grit and endurance. And wow, did I find out I could push way beyond that at Spartan. And, you know, so we joke a lot in the legal department at Spartan that, you know, we're this kind of like meta version of what it's like to run a Spartan race, because we have so many obstacles to navigate during the day. And then there's like a marathon at the end of, you know, when we actually get a couple of contracts out the door, it's like, oh, there's a new problem to solve. So Joe likes to talk about obstacle immunity as one of the reasons to do an obstacle course event. And it's this idea of, you know, making sure that you're going out there and intentionally engaging with something that's really challenging and not something that you think you can easily overcome, in order to be able to like find the rest of life a little bit easier. So if you go out and do a Spartan event and it kicked your butt, well, that means going to the office on Monday morning will probably not be that bad. And so you know, when it gets tough, it's really great to be able to sort of like remind yourself of that, you know, when, you know, those tough days happen, and working for a company like Spartan that has that dedication to the mission is, you know, makes it such an easy analogy.
So you talked earlier about, you know, everything getting canceled this year and everything that you guys had to put into place for the one race in Florida for COVID. And given that this is you're a growing brand every day, but what's next? Like what does Spartan sees next, and as things have totally changed and how we can approach these larger sporting events and these races, and, you know, things that are at the core of your business model?
Of course. Yeah. So first of all, I should mention that not everything has been turned off. We do have small events that are happening. And so in places where we know we can really enforce social distancing and operate, you know, 50 people or less, events. We have an endurance event called a Hurricane Heat, which has a backstory, but you can look it up on our website if you're, it's pretty interesting. And it's a 4 to 6 hour event. And traditionally, prior to COVID, it was really team oriented. And so you would have 100 people on site breaking up into teams of 10 and really sort of teams competing against each other. It was much more sort of boot camp style, military style. And we've shifted that a lot in order to be able to accommodate social distancing. And so everybody's got their sort of like 10-foot quadrant, and you're very much just kind of doing a long workout on your own in your quadrant, and, wearing masks, and you're in a big field. But you get to be outside and you get to be working out with other people. And so it was really interesting to see how many people signed up for the very first time for one of our Hurricane Heat events in 2020, simply because they wanted to get out of the house. They wanted to exercise with other people. And okay, you don't have an obstacle course race in my area going on. I'm going to go join one of your Hurricane Heats. So we have those kind of sprinkled around the United States and Canada, as long as we can keep them going in 2020. And they've been really successful. And from a risk mitigation practice, I'm, very happy about it. With regard to 2021 planning, it's tough. We don't have a crystal ball, just like no one else does. And so we're going to hope for the best and plan for the worst, as they say. And, I think that the thing that COVID has, allowed us to do, if we, use it as an opportunity, is to really take a step back and look at the overall business. Because while our primary source of revenue is really the obstacle course races themselves, it's really allowed e-commerce to step up and really shine. And so our strategy around not just US e-commerce, but global e-com has really grown and become much more strategic. And so there's going to be a greater emphasis on that, and not just apparel, but training and nutrition products, and, sort of like everything that you need in order to truly live the fit, Spartan lifestyle. And then we have a training app, and we've got all kinds of programming that we already had as part of our ecosystem. There's a podcast with all kinds of different mindfulness training and other programs that we were able to luckily pivot to online forums as soon as COVID hit. And so, we've done away a little bit with some of the sort of like intense Zoom trainings that we were doing back in March, April, and May, where people just really wanted to get a workout in and potentially get a workout in with Joe. That's going to allow, that's inspired us in order to really focus on, okay, how do we augment this going forward and really bake this into the overall customer journey? And so maybe something will be inspiring to somebody, and they'll come into our ecosystem wanting to do a Spartan Trail event next year. And so they'll sign up for, the training app or something like that. Maybe they'll never do an obstacle course race, and we're okay with that. It's really sort of figuring out how we're going to augment some of the things that we're doing well, but we should really put more focus into. So I don't know if I could really point to one area more than the other than training. And there's going to be a lot more online and app training opportunities next year. But we're all praying that we can get back to actual obstacle course races really soon.
I mean, this has been the year of the pivot. I think it's just, it's just how it's gone, but it really does allow you to, assess your strategies and kind of adjust and make things work, and for Spartan's credit, you were able to even expand your brand in ways that you may not have focused on had it been a quote normal year. So I think it's great.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think that just the mission helped us, kind of close ranks and figure out how we were going to really link arms and, face up to this as a company, because in a lot of ways we've trained for this. We as a team across all of the different departments, like we've all been through so many situations where we did have to pivot on a dime. When you're running an event company and you've got 70 events a year in the United States alone, and you're doing it in blizzards, and you're doing it in the desert, and you're doing it in hot, wet climates, and there's all kinds of like weather conditions and other things that can arise, the team gets pretty used to having to adapt very quickly and make sure that, you know, the show goes on, to mix metaphors. But we really had to sort of like realize that, okay, this is what we've been training for this whole time. And so my hat is off to our marketing team, especially because I was just astonished with how quickly that we had content up on the website and up on our social media feeds back in March. And we were able to keep it going for a really long time, and then strategically taper into, okay, let's start really like focusing on 2021 strategy.
You just said something that made me really think there. How do you adapt from, say, like the deserts out west to like the cold of the Northeast in Vermont, and all the races and everything in between, from, you know, potentially snow to rain to droughts, and have it all go off so seamlessly there? I mean, that's so many variables to take into consideration. It makes my head spin.
We do. We have an in-house engineer, and we have a lot of testing that we do in order to make sure that there's no sort of factory for the obstacles that, you know, we create. They're really something that we create, and then we make sure that the engineering proves that we can do it, whether it's at a 45-degree angle on a mountain, or whether it's on a flat surface, or whether it's on sand, you know, all different kinds of terrain, et cetera. And so, you know, the good thing is that when something does go wrong, we have the specs to show, oh, well, this is, you know, this happened because why, and this was like an anomaly, or this is something that we didn't really account for. And so we've been actually able to demonstrate that when an obstacle was damaged at one point, and I was submitting the insurance claim, that it was like clearly vandalism as opposed to weather related or, you know, sort of exposure related, precisely because we had engineered it for that type of terrain and that type of weather.
See, and I think it's fascinating hearing all of that, kind of the behind the scenes stuff with the engineering, because it's not something you can really see or appreciate when you're actually out there running a race for the lay person. You know, you just see, okay, it looks like they decided to throw a bunch of obstacles up on a mountain, and you're running up and down, and you're usually so tired and sore, you're not thinking about it. It's just kind of like, okay, it's there, I got to get through it. But to hear you say, you know, no, here's everything that's done ahead of time before it's even placed there, is something I don't think a lot of people even can know of, let alone appreciate.
Right. I mean, there's probably engineers and lawyers that think about it like you and I would if we're navigating a course. And, you know, I certainly can't just sort of relax and run a race these days anymore. Even if I'm just doing a regular road race, I'm sort of like, I wouldn't have put that on that sign. You know, I would have made that font bigger. And so, you know, that's good. That's good that people can just like really enjoy the experience. But there is a lot of science that goes into it. And that's not just true for the obstacle races. For the hurricane heats and our endurance events, you know, the team of people that lead those, the race directors, are called Cryptea. And they do a lot of analysis around sort of like, okay, what's the human body capable of? What's an adult capable of in terms of an endurance event? And, you know, can you do 3,000 burpees and then go do a 10-mile hike? Well, you know, let's do the math and kind of like figure out, you know, what we can allow here. And so that allows me, kind of coming back to our earlier topic of conversation, to have that discussion with the insurance carrier with, you know, data in my hand. But it also allows us to really make sure that we've invested all of the, you know, diligence and analysis that we can to have a safe, fun event for everybody that's still really challenging.
And I think that's kind of sets you apart from maybe some of the very small outfits that might just be, as Scott alluded to, throwing up obstacles. Like there's a lot of science and engineering and planning involved. This is not just a simple endeavor. And
And I don't know if that was something that we learned, over the years, and we've probably learned from our mistakes prior to, me arriving at Spartan, because the industry was different, in the early days. And so I think a lot of OCR operators learned from each other's mistakes in addition to Spartan learning from its own. But I think there was also a realization, at some point in the early days that it was like, okay, this really needs to be the focus in order for people to not only take us seriously from a safety perspective, but to take us seriously as a sport. Because like you mentioned USA OCR, there's a World OCR organization, and both the head of that organization as well as Joe DeSena have made it no secret that they would love to see OCR as an Olympic event. And so we have to make sure that we're documenting what we're doing and that we're doing it well in order to take it seriously as a sport by the people that are truly elite.
Well, I want to have you back on when you guys get into the Olympics.
That would be fun. That would be great.
And I want to hear all about that planning.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll have a whole new skill set that I had to navigate at that point.
Yeah, to talk about learning new things. Well, Deanna, it has been such a pleasure talking to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, I loved hearing everything about how you guys operate and the risks and how you mitigate those risks. And I think Scott's just geeking out that he's just happy.
Yes.
Both on the insurance side and as a Spartan racer.
Absolutely.
That's great.
I'm going to try and convince Megan next time we do this, it has to be part before and part after one of the races. I'm going to drag her out there for it.
Oh, you don't want to get live footage of the three of us running a race together? We could do the interview on the course.
Yeah, sure. We'll do that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, I really enjoyed having this conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and can't wait to have the next one. Looking forward to it. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.